as we go.
Oh
So
yeah,
Kayla's not
Geodude
here.
caught.
I know I'm shocked Kayla isn't here. Jan, where's Kayla?
Maybe she overslept again.
Oh, she overslept. Okay.
Maybe.
Probably.
All right. So first thing we'll do this morning, I want to go over really quickly the assignments for this week because there is an extra one this week. I said to you yesterday that this was a busy week. So I want to quickly go over the assignments with you, and then we'll start to talk about imperialism today. All right. So let me show you. The first assignment that you have this week is the Unit 6 review sheet. That's like normal. That hasn't changed. I mean, there's nothing different about that other than I made it a little bit shorter since you have other stuff to do today, this week rather. The second assignment for this week is in 3 parts, and it is the test day assignment. Okay, now for this assignment, you're going to be going through and looking at the test day experience. So for the first thing, okay, you're going to look at the rubric again, which I uploaded, which you should have seen before at this point. The rubric looks like this. Okay, and so what we're asking you to do for the first part is to look over each of these 4 sections, the thesis, contextualization, evidence, and analysis, and then tell me first, very quickly, tell me how many points each of those sections is worth, and then in a brief sentence or 2, tell me what you need to do to earn the point for each of those 4 areas, okay? And please make sure that you put that into your own words. Do not just copy and paste what the rubric says. So this first part here with the rubric is we want you to analyze the rubric and make sure that you understand how you're being scored. The second part of the assignment is you're going to go back through and look over that PowerPoint that I showed you on Friday, which I also uploaded and is attached to the assignment. Okay, and then as you go through that PowerPoint, you need to answer these 7 questions, okay? What day and time is the exam? What document do you need to take the test? How are you gonna receive it, etc. Okay, so this one is you just going through the PowerPoint, making sure that you understand exactly what you have to do and what you have to prepare for before the day of the exam. So that's part 2. And then the third part is you have to complete the demo. Okay, and so in order to complete the demo exam, you're going to go to cb.org/AP-demo. And when you type that in, it's going to take you to a screen that's going to look like this. Okay, and it's going to ask you to enter your AP ID. Now, because you're just doing the practice exam, you're not entering an ID yet. But on the day of the exam, this is where you will enter your AP ID, which is on your exam ticket. For right now, however, you would just type in practice to get to the practice exam or to get to the mock, okay? And then it's gonna walk you through the whole process. I'm not gonna go through the whole thing right now, but it's gonna make you do exactly what you would do on the morning of or on the afternoon of the exam, okay? And so what we're asking you to do this week for this is very simple. We're asking you to complete the demo. And then when you get to the end of the demo, okay, either take a picture or a screenshot of that screen that says that you have completed the demo and then upload it along with the assignment. So you can upload it as a separate file. Okay, that's probably going to be the easiest thing to do. We just want to make sure that we know that you have completed the demo exam. So you're familiar with what everything looks like, okay? And then for number 10, if you ran into any problems while you were doing the demo, just let me know. Okay, if I see what the problems are, I can try to reach out to you personally and I can offer you some kind of assistance. Okay, so that's the second assignment for this week is to go through the demo. And the reason I'm having you do it this week, okay, a couple weeks before the test, is that if something goes wrong or if you discover something's not working for you, we have time to address the problem and to fix it rather than waiting until the day of the exam. So I want you guys to go through this week. The third and final assignment for this week is the 3 multiple choice progress checks that I assigned to you guys on AP Classroom. Okay, there's one for Unit 1, one for Unit 2, and one for Unit 3. You just log into AP Classroom, and I had a couple students check on this last night to make sure that it worked. So you just log into AP Classroom, and it'll show you you have the following assignments due, and it'll tell you that the due date is Sunday night at midnight. I actually think one of them is Sunday at 11:45, but they're all right around midnight Sunday is when the due date is, and so you have all week to work on those. The one thing I will tell you about those is that they have a hard deadline. Okay, there's once you get to the time that they're due, you can't submit them anymore. So you don't want to be late with those. So please make sure that you get those done before Sunday night. Okay, because those are not accepted late, and those are done again not on Teams. Those are done on the AP Classroom site, which means you'll need to log in, which is good because you need to know how to log in to take your test anyway. Okay. So that is the third assignment for the week. Okay, so does anybody, before we move on to the main part of the lesson today, does anybody, okay, so somebody just asked, how do we get to AP Classroom? So you're gonna use your same AP login, the same email address and password that you use to log in to check your scores or anything like that. You're going to use that login to get in, okay? Log into AP, log into your college board account, and then it'll be right there, okay? Any other questions? Who has questions about what your assignments are for this week? Do the AP Classroom assignments have time limits? No, I did not put a time limit on them, okay? I decided not to, and that's because you're not being tested on multiple choice this year, so it didn't seem like it was important enough for me to put a time limit on them. So you can work through those at your own pace. Again, these are designed to help you review material as we get closer to the exam, okay? Other questions about any of the three assignments this week? No? Okay. All right, if you think of other questions, just share them in the chat and I'll get to them as we go. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and jump into imperialism now. We are on unit 6, so this is the last unit that we have to cover before your AP exam. Okay, so we are getting close to the end of the material that we need to cover. And so we are going to begin today. It looks like a question just popped up in the chat. Oops, I'll look at it later. We are going to begin today to talk about imperialism. Oh, somebody asked, do the assignments have the same amount of questions? The first two have 15, the last one has 9, okay? So it's 15, 15, and then 9 for the last one. Okay, so today we will begin to study Unit 6, and we're gonna start by talking again about imperialism, okay? Now, this little bit of context here, this is all stuff that we've talked about before, okay? And so we know that as states continue industrializing for various reasons, they continue expanding their colonies. And then we know that those colonies are gonna lead to these new empires, okay? These are things that we've talked about before. These are big cause and effect sort of things that we've looked at multiple times, okay? And we know that this conquering takes place both through the use of diplomacy, which is peaceful, and then warfare, obviously. Okay, so all of this empire building happens in multiple ways. Europe certainly is at the forefront of this in terms of the colonization movement in this era, but they are not the only ones at this point. Remember that by now the United States is involved. Okay, so the United States has grown to not quite a world superpower yet. That's not going to happen until after the war. But they are certainly an important figure in world politics at this point. And then also at this point, Japan plays a role in this as well. And so what you're going to see happening is you're going to see European supremacy being challenged for the first time, as well as a whole new set of ideas about nationalism, which is ultimately going to lead us into World War I, race, gender, and class, of course. Okay, and some of that comes as a result of the scientific revolution. Others, it's sort of newer, okay? And then eventually you're going to see some anti-imperialism forces come out of this as well, okay? And so our objective here, or what we're wanting to look to be able to do, is to explain how different ideologies help to contribute to the development of imperialism. So this is going to be things like white supremacy, right? Like the white man's burden. Okay, that is an ideology that certainly contributes to the development of imperialism. Okay, we know that there are cultural reasons for this. We know that there are religious reasons. Okay, we talked in school about social Darwinism, right? The idea that certain races are superior to others and thus are meant to rule over others, that it's scientific. Okay, we talked about the civilizing mission, which is like the white man's burden, that it's their duty as the more civilized nation to go about and to convert these lesser groups of people. And then, of course, we know that there is a religious motivation behind this. Okay, there is, the desire to convert these people from their native faiths or from their native beliefs to Christianity, obviously. Okay, and so the bottom line here, gang, is that this is all happening. Okay, this is all happening in states that, for the most parts, already had colonies. Okay, like the British, who had already been set up within India, or the Netherlands had already been in Indonesia. Okay, and then they're going to be joined by groups like the United States and the Japanese. Okay, and then our change in this era is that the power and the influence, right, of the Spanish and the Portuguese begin to decline. Okay, and so while we see, for example, the Dutch become extremely powerful during this period, okay, this period being 1750 to 1900, we see the Dutch becoming extremely powerful. That sort of contrasts with the idea that the Spanish, who had been very powerful from 1450 to 1750, their power declines. Okay, so that's one of our shifts. That's one of our changes. If we're looking at continuities and changes, that is a definite change. Who is powerful during this second era of colonization versus who was powerful during the first era? Okay, and so we know again that we are going to see warfare used in some instances. Okay, and then in other instances, like the British within India, we're going to see diplomacy used, meaning it's going to be more peaceful. Okay, we're going to see some settler colonies, okay, as well as the practice of neo-colonialism. Okay, so all of these things are going to be established during this era. So how exactly do we define imperialism? What exactly is it? Okay, I think the sort of common working definition of imperialism is that it's the domination of one country by some other country, either through their political, economic, or cultural life. Okay, and so they are controlling the country in one, or in some cases, all three of those different ways. Okay, when we talk about settler colonies, the settler colonies certainly controlled the economic and to some extent the political life of the natives, but they didn't really touch on the cultural life. Whereas when you talk about full colonies like the British in North America, okay, you are seeing all three of those areas being touched: political, economic, and cultural. Okay, we know that a lot of European nations were practicing imperialism, and that some of them it was on the rise for, like the Dutch, okay, like the British. Others, it was beginning to fall, like the Spanish, like the Portuguese, okay? So we're kind of moving to the end of their era. We also know that imperialism is certainly jump-started or kind of kicked across the starting line by the Industrial Revolution, okay? So all of those economic developments that we talked about last week certainly play a role here in getting this sort of imperial age started, okay? And so by the end of the age of imperialism, just before, in the decade or so before World War I is going to begin, this is what the world is going to look like, okay? And so you can look at the map key. Let me see if I move this, okay? You can take a look at the map key down here, and you can see all of the different European powers that are controlling different parts of the world. Okay, and then of course, yes, you have the United States, okay, you have Japan, and to a smaller extent, you have China, okay? But again, this is still very much a European domination. You're also going to see it shift back to the Eastern Hemisphere again. Notice again, if you look over here in the Western Hemisphere, South America, okay, is now independent. This is what I was telling you a couple minutes earlier, that the influence and the power of the Spanish and the Portuguese decline. Central and South America, from Mexico on down to the Cape of Good Hope, these are all now independent nations. Okay, so Spain's influence has certainly dwindled. Portugal's influence has certainly dwindled. And you're seeing things shift back to Africa as well as the Pacific Islands. Okay, and to answer, I think it was Jorge who always asks about this. Look, Australia is now a thing. Okay, at this point, Australia is a British prison colony, but it is at this point a thing. Okay, it does exist. Okay. And so there you go. Okay. Again, at this point, India is a British colony as well, and you can see kind of how Africa also has been carved up. Okay, so this is what the world looks like at the end of this era. Speaking of Africa, as I mentioned to you, Africa is sort of the epicenter of all of this. And so Africa is going to be the main continent in terms of resources that the Europeans are going to look to conquer. And so if we take a look, before the scramble, before the conference, before the Berlin conference and all of that, look at how independent Africa was. Okay, you can see it's very politically diverse. There's not a lot of European control here. Okay, the British have a little territory down here in what would later become South Africa. The French are up here in Algeria. And then you have the Ottomans over here along the northeast coast in what used to be Egypt. But then look what happens, okay, less than 40 years later, okay? Africa gets carved up, and you can see Africa is almost entirely European, with just a couple of exceptions, Ethiopia and Liberia being the two main ones, okay? But you can see how Africa just gets carved up and gets partitioned by the Europeans. And so the British gain a whole lot of territory. They're the ones here in olive green. You've got the French up here in the northwest. Okay, you even have the Germans, and then of course the Belgians, your pal King Leopold. Okay, and the rubber colonies down there in the Congo. Okay, so Africa really gets carved up during this era. Okay, and so what you have is you have these Europeans, like you see depicted here in the cartoon. Okay, everybody here, you know, is looking for their kind of peace. Okay, everybody wants their share of the food. Okay, or the resources that they can get out of Africa. And so again, you have the missionaries going in. Okay, and so you have pictures like this. This is again the idea of the noble savage, right? Okay, that these are people not to be enslaved. Okay, these are people to be pitied. Okay, that they need to be civilized. Okay, they need to be shown the European way of life. They need to be taught that that is the best way. Okay, and again, you kind of see that in this image as well, where you have the British and the Americans sort of dragging the natives up the mountains of civilization, okay, to try to get them there. Again, this is the idea that they need to be taught, okay, that they need to learn how to be civilized. And then, of course, the Berlin Conference, right? The idea that Africa is just a giant pie and that all these European powers, like you see here in the cartoon, should get their piece of the pie. Okay, everybody wants a piece of the African pie. This is the scramble for Africa. Okay, you have the idea that there is an ongoing war being fought between civilization over here on the left and the barbarians over here on the right. Okay, or this cartoon showing England's imperial ambitions, the idea that England is like an octopus with its hands kind of in every different part of the world. Okay, or good old Cecil Rhodes. Okay, remember that he tries to build, or he does build the telegraph line that stretches from North Africa all the way down into South Africa. So the idea that they were connecting Africa via this new technology, okay, the telegraph. Okay, and here we have, oh, hold on, somebody just asked a question in the chat. I thought those were puppet strings. No, those are cable lines, okay? And so if we go back, can I go back? Yeah, okay. Those are not puppet strings, those are cable lines, okay? Cecil Rhodes wanted to connect Africa from north to south and connect it with Europe by building a series of telegraph lines which would allow communication to be much easier. And so that's what he's holding in his hand there, okay? All right, so this one here, okay, I think I've showed you this one before too, right? You have civilization sort of cutting away the old native ways. And so you have this Japanese man here who's having his traditional headdress, his hair, his ponytail being cut off by the woman here who represents civilization. Okay, and so you can see the scissors here, okay, say progress, okay, that says traditions, okay, and then you can see within civilization, because she's labeled here in her cape as civilization, she has progress with her. She's got the telegraph lines over here, she's got the railroads, etc. Okay, it says China, excuse me, not Japan. Thank you, Jarlenis. Okay, so it's the same, the same kind of a system though, whether it's China, whether it's Japan. It's the idea that the Europeans were stripping Asians of their culture in the name of progress, okay? Again, the idea of trying to civilize them, okay? And then of course we have the British and the French here carving up the world for their use, okay? I don't think that one needs much further explanation. And then this one, we know we've all seen before, the Chinese dragon, who has been slain, okay, by a variety of those different nations, okay? And so we've got Russia over here is the bear, America back here in the eagle. We've got the British lion, of course, over here. Germany, okay, is the vulture. Okay, we've got the dodo bird down here, which is Austria. Italy appears to be the wolf, and then Japan down there in the left is the leopard, okay? And you can see that they've all slain the Chinese dragon, okay? And then of course, this is from a French magazine. I know I've shown this to you before too, and this is the French bringing civilization. Who's the rooster? Let's go back and let's see. That's a good question, and I don't know because the rooster is not labeled and I don't see a flag or anything. So I'm not sure who the rooster is meant to be. That's an excellent question. I don't know because they are not labeled and it's not apparent who they might be. So that's a good question. Sorry, I couldn't answer that one. Mika says it's a bystander. Jan says it might be Spain. Jorge said it's definitely not France. Okay. Speaking of France, though, this was obviously from a French magazine, okay, and again depicting France arriving in one of their colonies over in Asia, Southeast Asia, bringing progress and civilization and brotherhood, okay, to the native peoples. Now, this is how colonization was depicted within France. So this is what the French people obviously think is happening. The reality, of course, is somewhat different. Okay, and so we know that the native people were not nearly as welcoming, of course, as they are being depicted here. Okay, and then of course this wasn't the first time, right, that this had happened. Okay, this is not our first, or this is not Europe's first foray into the world of colonization. And so we know that we had seen an era of colonization from 1450 to 1750. Now we're looking at this second era from 1750 to 1900. And so we know that at least initially, they were colonizing to escape things like religious persecution. Over time, that begins to change. And so during this new era of colonization, we see them thinking about natural resources, like you see pictured here. Jan said the rooster is France. Okay, thank you, Jan. And so we see a shift away from people setting up colonies to escape religious persecution, and now doing so because they want access to economic and raw materials. And so we have sugar cane over here. Okay, these are beaver pelts. Okay, this is cotton, and then this is tobacco. So this is from the sort of old idea of colonization. Okay, over time, these products are going to change, and you're going to see products like rubber, okay, becoming the more profitable ones. And so this new imperialism in this new era, okay, from 1750 to 1900, leads to a whole new set of desires. Okay, obviously, again, rubber is a big resource. It's not the only one. Okay, petroleum, manganese, which is used in steel, palm oil, which gets used to make machinery. Okay, and then these products, okay, are going to be sold to a different market now. These are not going to be products that are going to be used simply by the upper classes. The Industrial Revolution has created a very wealthy and very hungry to buy middle class. And so this middle class group is going to want access to these materials. Okay. There also are political motives to this. Okay. We're seeing much better ships now that are steam ships. Okay. So they can pretty much sail where they need to sail. They're not beholden to the tides or the wind at this point. And so you have these steamships that can sail around the world. And that's important now because as these ships are doing this, they're going to need bases, and they're going to need places to load and to unload supplies and to refuel. And so they're going to set up these colonies with these large harbors as ports for people to do that. Okay. Another reason why you'd want to set up ports like this or set up harbors like this is because you could claim that territory for yourself, which would keep other nations supposedly, I mean, it didn't work this way, but it would supposedly keep these other nations from trying to invade. It was a way for these nations to sort of increase their own national security. Now, that didn't work. There were plenty of invasions and there were plenty of wars the whole time. Okay. And then, of course, we had the religious goals, which involve converting people. Okay. And so Europeans become genuinely concerned during this time period about what they called godless heathens, these people that were not Christian, did not understand Christianity. Okay, again, the idea of the noble savage, that yes, they are beneath us, but it's our duty as white Christian Europeans to bring the word of God to them and to teach them how to be civilized. Okay, what they called the blessings of Western civilization. And so in addition to Christianity, they are going there and they are spreading ideas about how to run a government, how to have a democratic government. Okay, they're teaching them about modern European medicine. Okay, so all of those ideas are being brought to the what they believed were the savages by the Europeans. Okay, and it was driven then once again by this idea of social Darwinism, the idea that there was a sense of racial superiority, or that the white Anglo-Europeans were superior to these other groups of people. And so what they did is they would apply Darwin's ideas about natural selection, and they would say that the white Europeans were the fittest of the species. They were the most evolved, the most advanced. And so because these white Anglo-Europeans were superior, they were then meant to dominate over these lower groups of people. Okay, and they would try to make this point to people, and I know I've showed you this video before, I'm not going to show it to you again, right? Through the use of these human zoos, okay, these extremely disturbing human zoos, where they would take quote unquote native peoples, they would try to put them into their typical environment, and the Europeans would just walk around to all these different exhibits, see these people living in what they believed were savages, right? See these people living like this and say, see, this is why we have to go to Africa. We have to help these poor people, okay? And so that was, again, a very real thing, okay? and I showed you that video. I remember back when we were in class, but it was done to try to sell to the Europeans that this is why we're colonizing. When, like we had talked about previously, the reality was what they're actually doing is they're exploiting these people for their natural resources, right? And they're basically enslaving them by the millions to get them to go work in the very harsh conditions in places like the rubber plants. Okay, Leopold, of course, was very much involved in that. Okay, and so what they were telling people at home is that look at these poor people that we're helping, when the reality was that they certainly weren't helping these people, who, by the way, didn't need help. They were simply enslaving them. Okay, very much, very much treating them very, very poorly. Okay. And so we don't need to talk about that again. Okay. One of the things that comes out of this era, of course, is a book about the white man's burden. It's called Heart of Darkness, and it's written by Joseph Conrad. And this is a book about the white man's burden, about social Darwinism. Conrad is sailing into Africa, okay, and he's writing about his experiences, and he's talking about everything that he sees and that he finds, and is kind of justifying what why Europe should be doing the things that he's doing. So it is very much a pro-Europe, pro-white man's burden book. It's a very famous book, okay? And like he says here, that they were hunters for gold or pursuers of fame. They had all gone out on the stream bearing the sword and often the torch, messengers of the might within the land, bearers of a spark from the sacred fire. What greatness had not floated on the ebb of that river into the mystery of an unknown earth. So they're bringing the light. They're bringing the sacred fire. They're bringing civilization to these poor people, okay? And then, he goes on to say, right, that they live in the midst of the incomprehensible, that they're detestable, that there's a fascination about them, okay, that they're powerless, okay? And so he really describes the people and the tribes that he encounters as being very much beneath them, again, furthering the idea that the Europeans have to do this, okay? And so what we start to see happening then during this time period, right, is that we start to see Europeans begin to exert some control over their colonies, okay, for several different reasons. In some cases, it's direct control. In some cases, it's indirect control, okay? And so one example of that would be, for example, down in the Congo with Leopold, okay? That colony was essentially control. Somebody just asked, did everyone believe in social Darwinism? The Europeans certainly did, yes, okay? I can't imagine that the African or that the Asian people did, but certainly the Europeans, yes, thought that this was right and that this was justified, and they felt that they were doing these people a favor, okay, that they weren't being, bad, that they weren't like the people from the previous era who had simply enslaved them. They felt like, no, we are not enslaving these people, we're just teaching them how to be civilized, okay? So they didn't see themselves as bad people. They saw themselves as doing God's work, okay? Anyway, what I was saying, okay, about how these colonies were controlled is that you have some colonies like the Congo, okay, which was essentially under private ownership, okay? So this was a colony that was not controlled by the government, okay? This was a colony that was controlled by a country on behalf of the government. But then you have just the opposite happening in Indonesia, okay? And so you have it shifting from control by a company, the Dutch East India Company, to the government. So now the government is in control. So these are two opposite things happening, okay? You have the Belgian government giving up control of the Congo, whereas you have the Dutch government taking control of Indonesia, okay? And so both things are happening, in some cases happening simultaneously, okay? We know that the European states, okay, obviously are the main ones here, as well as the United States and the Japanese, okay? And then Spain and Portugal's influence continues to decline, okay? And so here again, in yet another image, right, we see China, okay? So we see China right here in the middle being brought into civilization. Notice we've got Britain over here. This is the United States, okay? Over here we see France. We've got Russia, Italy back here. She's not labeled, but she's definitely German, okay? And then we've got Spain over here. And so you have, yes, the Dutch are still extremely rich. Jorge, why are you typing in all capital letters? Why are you yelling? And so, yes, you have these European nations kind of welcoming them in, welcoming them to civilization, okay, as depicted there. Okay. We also know, again, that in some parts of the world, in some parts of their empire, they are going to establish what they call settler colonies. We know that the United States, Russia, and Japan all expand their territorial holdings. Okay, so they're all gaining territory during this era and becoming more powerful. Okay, how much more so? Well, let's just use Russia as an example. So if we start here, the brownish area is the territory Russia occupied in 1533. Okay, by 1689, they've gained control of all of this lavender colored area. Okay, by 1801, they've added the red area. Okay, by 1825, they've added the yellow. 1855, right, they've added the green. 1881, they've added the blue, and then by 1894, they've added the orange. So you can see over this almost 350 or so year period, okay, you have Russia greatly expanding its own influence. The United States, same thing. Okay, so we know that at the beginning of this era, right, the United States pretty much exists along the East Coast. Okay, and then we can see how that changes over time. Okay, they gain a whole lot of territory after the war. Okay, the Louisiana Purchase, which is one of the smartest things Jefferson ever did, becomes part of the country in 1803, and then we continue, as you can see, moving west. And then eventually we move even further west off of the coast of the United States and begin taking territory on those islands, okay, in the Pacific. Many of which are still, obviously, Hawaii is one of our states, okay, but Guam remains a U.S. territory. Samoa remains a U.S. territory. The Philippines obviously becomes independent, but you do see, again, the United States looking to continue to expand its influence. And so if you were thinking about this and thinking about, like, maybe you have an essay topic about this and you're in the mood to, or you have the time to go for the complexity point, okay, something that you might think about an essay about this topic, about imperialism, okay, these are 3 things that you could do that would help you add complexity to an essay about this, okay? You might talk about the effects of imperialism and qualify them as either being positive or negative. Maybe you would compare imperialism during this time period of 1750 to 1900 to the previous imperialistic period of 1450 to 1750. Remember that in order to get a complexity point for comparison, you need to contrast as well. Compare implies contrast. So here you would be looking for similarities and for differences, for continuities and for changes, okay? Or you might look ahead to the next era, which is going to be harder for you to do because we haven't gotten to this era yet. We won't get to this era and it's not being tested. But if you were looking to a future era, okay, you might talk about how the events of this era from 1750 to 1900 provided the context for decolonization that's going to happen in the next century after the war is over, okay? And so, again, if you're comparing and contrasting, you might think about what was similar and what was different, what the continuities were, and then what the changes were, okay? And so, as we look at the environmental factors, as we begin to wrap this up, okay, we know that these environmental factors are all going to center around natural resources, okay? They're all going to center around a need for raw materials, okay, which can then be manufactured. And so in terms of the raw materials, the big ones are going to be cotton, rubber, palm oil, guano, meat, diamonds, okay? These are, again, as you can see, mostly, but not entirely, they're mostly being pulled out of Africa, okay? And they're being used to create manufactured goods, okay, back in Europe where the Industrial Revolution is still churning along. And they are making people very, very rich. And so it's the raw materials that are being pulled out of here, okay? And so here's a world map that kind of gives you an idea of what these major products, what these major raw materials are. Okay, now this is by no means an exhaustive list. Okay, this is just some of the big ones, but we know cotton, rubber. Okay, rubber also comes out of Congo as well. Okay, obviously the diamond mines, meat. Argentina has some of the best beef in the world, even today. Okay, wheat coming out of the United States, obviously sugar cane. Okay, so a lot of these products, okay, are sort of the products that make up the new imperialism. Notice it's not, notice you don't see tobacco on here. That was the previous era. Okay, you do still see cotton on here, but notice it's not cotton coming from the United States. Notice it's a much nicer, much fancier cotton coming from a different part of the world. And then obviously sugarcane, sugar is sort of this great endurer, okay? It is, one of those products that's made it across different ages, okay? And so we know here's kind of one example of this, okay? Importing cotton from India, right, is extremely expensive. And so we know that the British want to begin to move away from that. Okay, they don't want to continue importing cotton from India. They want to start producing their own cotton, okay, because it's significantly cheaper. Okay, and so what they do in order to get the British themselves to begin producing their own cotton, they put a huge import tax on any cotton that comes in from India. Okay, that's going to decrease cotton production to about 3%. Unfortunately, however, the cheaper textiles of Great Britain are not of the same quality as the hand-woven Indian textiles, but the British cotton is a whole lot cheaper. And so you have a difference between the quality versus the price that you're going to pay, okay, right? It's the idea that you get what you pay for, okay? We also know, right, that the British and the French are going to need markets for these goods, okay? China has no interest in trading with the Europeans, so the British have to find a way to force the Chinese into trade, and they do so by getting involved in the opium trade, okay? And so what they did is they got the Chinese addicted to opium. They fought the opium wars against China, and when China lost the opium wars, the Chinese are forced to open certain markets to British traders. Okay, so that's another example. I don't think I have to go into precious metals and diamonds here. They are extremely rare, okay? And they are extremely labor intensive because they do involve mines, okay? And so they are going to fuel, obviously, a very high rate of demand. Okay, so that brings us to the end. Look, I finished a little early today. That brings us to the end, and so I'll stop here and we'll go ahead and ask what your questions are. Anybody have questions for me this morning? None at all? Okay. Have they made steel? What do you mean? Who is they, and what do you mean have they made steel? I'm not sure, or hey, I'm not sure what you're asking there. No? Okay. Yeah, or hey, I'm not sure what that question is. Oh, has Europe made steel? You mean then? Yes, they needed steel. Okay, in fact, prior to all of this anyway, because remember, steel is one of the main products that comes out of the Industrial Revolution. So yes, they were absolutely involved in the production of steel. Okay, good question. Okay. All right, so if there are no further questions, I will let you guys go. Remember to budget your time well this week because, like I said, there is an extra assignment as we get closer and closer to your exam. So you don't want to put that you don't want to put that work off, and you especially don't want to put off the multiple choice questions, because again, that one does close at the end of the week. Okay, so budget your time well. I will see you guys again on Wednesday. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and otherwise have a great day. And again, I will see you guys on Wednesday. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.